much. They just have little bristles. But in other types of segmented and other segmented animals, these things repeat. There's a reason why we have very similar bones and to some extent muscles in our arms and our legs. We have a ball and socket joint, a single bone, a fairly flexible joint in the middle, 2 bones down here, some floating bones there, a bunch of little long bones here. Same thing in your leg. We are segmented. You look at your backbone, you look at the way the nerves come out of your backbone. To some extent, you look at the way that our circulation system is laid out and the muscles down our backs. And we don't have a lot of segmentation left. Our internal stuff is very, very little segmentation to that. But as an embryo, we do start segmented because one of the first things that forms is your nervous system and your circulation system. Again, just a basic way to start it out, and then you go from there. Grab the wrong thing. Excretion is waste removal. Make sure I don't forget anything. What have I got here? These annelids have these little rods that stick out and support what are basically like little thick fins that as they move along, they help push water and it helps push the worm forward. So they're good crawlers and they're good swimmers. And the little bristles, the support systems are seedy. They're not really legs because they don't have a lot of joints to them. But they do, down the road, provide a system that becomes more jointed appendages, more legs. And the parapods are that. And when you've got a bunch of them that just repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat, you wind up with a system that's called this. Serial homology. In a series, you're building using the same structures. Our arms and our legs are serially homologous. Insect legs, there's 6 of those, serially homologous. Crustacean legs, there could be, 20 of them. The big ones in the front have the same number of joints, same number of toes, interact with the body in the same way as the little ones behind that it walks with. As millipedes have many, many, many legs, all built by the same structure, homologous, in a series. And that's a very typical thing you see in segmented animals. Now this one's a little tricky. The digestive system definitely doesn't repeat. The brain is specialized up front. Later in segmented animals that have like insects with a lot of coordination to do with wings and legs, you may have specialized processors that go in series through part of the body to help coordinate the wings and the legs. You're going to get a question about that in a lab later. And The nervous system follows that basic setup I talked about. It goes down the belly side, the ventral side, and it's paired. There's a pair of them running. Later on, we're going to make a distinction between this and what we have. We have a dorsal single cord, and ours is technically hollow. Theirs are not. Their cords are not hollow. But anything I put on them, other than not hollow, doesn't really, they're not, sometimes you put solid down, but that makes it sound like they're solid, and they're not really solid. Okay, some other stuff that you get. They have a cuticle that can be, very often it's waterproof, it's somewhat protective. It's made from a material that also goes into the, thank you, something just got delivered. Goes into the mandibles, which I'm going to write down in a second, and the bristles. It's a material that's fairly light but fairly strong called chitin. That'll show up later. And they've got these pinching mouth parts or chewing mouth parts. And on their front ends, they have antennae, which are typically sensory, help feel their way through the world, and you often can pick up chemicals, so it's also kind of a smelling sensory source. There are three major groups. You can copy off of this. And also it's in the book. You've got the polychaetes, many bristles, polychaetes, many bristles. And these these are water worms. Most of them live in the ocean. The ones that live in fresh water don't tend to be in this group, they tend to be in this group. These can live almost like an earthworm existence in the sediments of the oceans. They've got all sorts of fancy things that they do as filter feeders. Some of them stay in one place and encase themselves in casings. They do all sorts of different things in the water, and they can get pretty big. Another one of those disappearing fish stories, there was an aquarium in a museum in London where the fish just kept disappearing. They keep pushing fish in, they would disappear. Nothing was getting in at night. They couldn't figure out why. So they figured, okay, we're draining this tank. It was a huge tank, as big as our lab tables, in fact, bigger. And when they took all the stuff off the bottom, they had coral, like it built themselves a coral reef. There was a marine worm that was this long that never came out when there were lights on, but came out at night to eat the fish. And they had probably picked it up, as a teeny tiny little worm originally. And so until it got really big, it wasn't really an issue there. It had been there for a really long time growing. They don't typically get that big, but there are some species that get pretty doggone big. These are the oligochaetes, which means a few bristles. It includes the earthworms. If you get a big earthworm and you rub the bottom of it, you can feel there's little bristles on every segment. But freshwater have bigger bristles. We'll look at some freshwater ones in the lab and you'll see the bristles on those. So this is freshwater and earthworms. And then these guys are the most kind of specialized, in some ways the most developed of the segmented worms, in that they've lost a lot of their segmentation on the inside. You can see it on the outside, but a lot of it, you don't have these chambers, these donut-shaped chambers in every segment, which is actually a hydrostatic skeleton. It gives the muscles something to pull against and squish and make it thicker and thinner. Now these guys get a bad rap. These are the leeches, and you can call them the leeches. I don't care if you call them Hirodinia. The leeches are primarily predators. They generally grab little animals and pull them apart. Their front suckers are very powerful. They can rip things up. There's a few of them that are exclusively parasites. They attach to bigger animals and they rasp away at them, and then they take blood that way. A lot of them are what are called facultative parasites. Facultative parasites are, I'll be a parasite if the opportunity comes along, but I don't have to live that way. As opposed to what are called obligate parasites, which can only survive as parasites. And I may ask you that on a bonus question, since I haven't written it down. But I may ask you, what's the difference between facultative and obligate leeches, because some of the leeches are obligate and some of them are facultative. Okay, that is it for that chapter. That was a nice short chapter and a nice short video.